Morning, folks. Dark Car Chat. Staying nice and connected to the witching hour in the morning. Welcome to Mrs. Car Chat. In cue, soothing music. That'll be an edit. The the point of attention at the moment is this relationship that happens internally in the body. And hopefully, I'm not going to speak in riddles here. I think that when you look at it this way, uh, organ dynamics, the dynamic purpose of organs, not just as tools for life, not just as tools for survival, not just as automated tools for as vital um, necessary vital organs. There are mechanisms for their usefulness and praxis of movement. They themselves don't pump very well. They kind of just, from my experience, they're very sensory. They're highly sensitive. And imagine if they were actually exposed to the elements, how sensitive they'd actually be. Um, they they require a set amount of space in mass. They all have weight. They carry a lot of they carry a lot of real estate in the body. And that is also dependable with the architecture of the chassis that you create. Now, the chassis, again, is a skeletal structure. And hopefully by now we are all in agreement that you the goal is to adapt your chassis uh, in an orientation in such a configuration that is calibrated, that is prepared and conditioned to work in efficiency, not inefficiency, but within efficiency of the forces of gravity, right? Which is always going to be an extension, not an extension. It's not an extension. It is part of you. That is the common missing equation when it comes to, it's the linchpin, I may say, and I'll go into this in later detail, but as use as a timestamp, it is the linchpin uh, to pinnacle health, and also a linchpin to what modern medicine is missing, because it's not sellable, it's not injectable, it's not edible, right? So, and it requires attention and it requires work, and people have a histamine response to work. So, your chassis has got to be the container for your organs to orientate, shape, and create pressure on these organs in a specific way. The behavior of how they then react, or at least are stimulated by the forces of movement, is important. It's critically important. Um, so let me put it to you this way. It's like, let's take a glass container, not a glass, any container. Let's say, just call it a glass for reference, right? And you put a bunch of different. And I'm back. I just ran out of phone storage space. So, where was I? Yes, pebbles in a glass in a container. And let's look at it as the container of as the architecture of your skeletal structure, um, and how it holds that into position. The shape of the container is going to determine how these pebbles are orientated and how they line up in a longitudinal manner, and somewhat of a limited freedom in the horizontal one as well. There should be constant pressure, with the availability and the malleability and the suppleness to be able to expand and contract in both spectrums as well. This is the basic requirement of a pump, right? You need vacuum and you need positive pressure. You need a contraction in some degree and a resistance to the vacuum from imploding, and the resistance from compression in exploding implode, explode, right? Such is the spectrums and the frequencies of life. Now that you're with me here, the container needs to have this suppleness and rigidity as well to be able to hold this spectrum. The organs themselves are kind of like squishy rocks, right? They need to work in ratio with these forces as well. So these forces are reactive to how gravity runs through your body. This all needs to be calibrated. This unison is critical for health and all the byproducts that come off of it that people love so much, like your muscles and your fitness. The one part that makes this like filling up the glass with water to complete its the fill of empty space, the fill of the void within it, the emptiness, which I can probably see is the cause of flaccidity. And I'll go into this flaccidity and I would say to some degree hypermobility. And that's another chat for another day, but I want to get this concept down before I rant on other things. I'll use that as a timestamp for the next discussion, because it's highly relevant. The water fills up the rest of the negative space, and then you can put a cap on it. Now, the water that goes into it is the uniqueness of having lungs that can manipulate, if that's the right word, is like at least have a variable of pressure via air. So a lot of the times you have limited space. Like the lungs are quite happy to, in most cases, like expand and contract as they're specifically meant to do, but they have very little fluid in it. So it's a chamber that doesn't directly have a dependence on fluid dynamics, right? So it's not like you squish them and a bunch of water comes out of them like a sponge or something like that. You know, they play with space, and it's a pressure game there. So the idea that's its unique function. Its uniqueness is the ability to be able to fill this void, not necessarily to have a maximum O2 potential. This is where you start, because if you're in alignment with your container and holds a certain space, it's part of the pressure system. The diaphragms, and there's a series of them, are meant to, within either sequence or like so sequentially or collaboratively at the same time, contract and expand depending on the nature of forces of gravity that are going to be running through you, right? So that's like high input or low input, and dependent on the activity that is happening. Meant to use this to match the frequency or above the frequency of that amount of force that is entering and exiting your body. The organs in their place provide this. If you don't have organs in the right space and orientation within your body to balance this dynamic act, and they're just there, and your container's all bent out of shape, and the organs are all out of shape, your lungs are not going to be able to they're not going to be able to have the utility of these functions. And you're going to have dissonance all over the body. And the body's persistent. It's going to want to survive, and it will do a very, very, very good job of it. However, your access to the utility of its featured designs are more likely going to be either the low-end features of life, or you're going to be running off viruses and bugs. So you might be thinking, wouldn't that restrict the amount of VO2 that I have? Let's say like the volume the volume of air that is available to my lungs. Yeah, the idea is yes, but now you start talking in terms of like, when you are movement efficient, is there a necessity to have so much air in order to negate these thresholds? Chemically, I think I ran out of room again. I just delete a bunch of shit off my phone. So yeah, I was back onto that part where I was saying, the emphasis, or at least the worldview that, we have to have things in extreme measures, kind of gets in the way of this. It really gets in the way. Like, that mental model really has to die in order for us to accept that things, when you work in efficiency, don't have to tip the scale to that degree. And that's not a healthy way of maintenance. It's not a healthy benchmark to have. So when you work into chemical dynamics of the body, like, this is where, the ability to have the threshold of operating in, let's say, the modern viewpoint of optimal amount of oxygen saturation, or CO2. This is where, like, if you read up about your Brutinkos and stuff like that, about being able to be in a carbon dioxide like rich environment and adapting to that, there is validity in both of these things. You don't always need to be in CO2, and you don't always need to be in oxygen, but you should be able to regulate with either and thrive in either one. So if you are chemically efficient, you are mechanically efficient, and your energy systems are efficient, your ATP production, your mitochondria is working well, and like your nerves, the deep fractal nerves, are all expressed and open because of this alignment. And in these deeper layers of like controlling the organs, they can express these power lines and be part of this system. If you're super efficient, this is the biomechatronics. That's the electrical system. The electrical system conjoins everything together. You don't need a lot of air volume. It serves a purpose to have enough. If the body's efficient with it, it doesn't need much. It's like being fuel efficient, right? A very efficient car will require very little fuel. Think of it more like a hybrid system. You have an electrical system, and you have a combustion system. It's the same thing. Most of the time, people are just running on combustion system, and like, they run on a 12-volt battery, with an engine that's sitting there lugging around this fucking, half a ton worth of freaking electrical gear in their body, and it's doing nothing. They're just dragging it along, like wasting fuel. That's the same thing with the body. We have these features. We have the hardware that's there, but it's never really been expressed or plugged in to begin with, So, I know I'm ranting now. That is a viewpoint of direction. That is where I'm trying to take this down, to understand how does this all unify. There's not a lot of good examples around. However, there are a few people and there are a few examples around where you can see this. I don't see too many standout examples of this, but it doesn't mean that it's not featureable, right? So that's where I'm going with this. I'm going to go back through the video and timestamp some of these things and write down what I was saying I wanted to express into this thing. This is just going to go down to this. This is 5:30 in the morning. Maz Car Chat. Have a good day, motherfuckers. Keep it real.